Hello, everybody. Welcome to video number 2 for chapter 5. Okay, this video is going to cover organizational change. Okay, so being able to manage change is an important part of being a police manager. Okay, it's impossible for any organization to continually operate, in the same manner forever. Like you can't just always do the same thing all the time. Like you have to change. Now we spent quite a bit of time to this point talking about police reform and what that's looked like over the years. So reform is change, but change does not always equal reform. Okay, so for reforms to actually take hold and become operating procedures, there must be some kind of organizational change to accompany it. And there's not a one-size-fits-all approach to organizational change in general, but especially not for the police. So there's a couple main ways that change can occur. The first is reorganizing. Now this reorganizing is changing the structure of the organization. It could be something minor, or it could encompass some kind of large wholesale change. Usually when you're talking about restructuring, you need to have another strategy that you're using at the same time with the reorganizing, because simply redrawing lines or moving people doesn't necessarily change behavior or change whatever you're trying to do. Okay, change can also be enacted by improving leadership and management. Okay, so changes in leadership, such as hiring a new police chief from outside the organization, is one of the most common change strategies in policing, and really just about anywhere. Especially like think about sports. If a team's not playing well, what's the first thing they do? Well, they get rid of the head coach, right? Or bring in somebody else. If the corporation's not doing well, what do? Well, they fire the CEO, right? They bring in somebody else. So changing the leadership and management is oftentimes one of the most popular kind of change strategies, and it's actually one of the easiest ones. Instead of trying to enact some kind of wholesale change, just bringing in somebody new, and then maybe they try to enact some wholesale change. But changing the leadership is a very, very common change strategy. Revising policy and procedures is another change technique. Okay, policies and procedures are really the main ways that police administrators influence officer behavior. So if you're changing those policies and procedures, that can influence an organizational change. However, subculture can make this type of change difficult. Things like unions can make this kind of change difficult because there's already set ways, already established ways that are doing things, whether that be from the subculture or whether it be part of the collective bargaining agreement through the union. But also, if officers don't support the changes, they'll be difficult to enact. Okay, because remember, supervisors aren't always there when the police are doing stuff. So the police could choose to do a policy, they could choose to not do a policy or a procedure. Okay. Changing strategies and tactics, another way to enact change. Okay, community-oriented policing is a great example of this. Okay, that's been the dominant organizational change initiative for at least the last 20 years, if not longer. But it's an example of strategies and tactics. But again, as we've talked about before, we know there's a lot more to this than just changing strategies and tactics, right? There's a lot more to implementing community policing than there is just changing some strategies and tactics. That would be a whole organization type of change effort. All right, behavior and culture. Okay, these are usually the reasons for the organizational change. Okay, change of behavior is usually why you're doing a change. But change of behavior is usually pretty difficult to change because behavior and routines become ingrained, especially with police officers. Okay, so you're not only trying to change behavior with police officers, you're trying to change decision making is what you're really trying to do. But making that even more difficult is this influence of the culture and the subculture. Because remember, the occupational culture of police officers is often at odds with the managerial culture, and that's one of your biggest impediments to organizational changes. You have managerial culture wanting one thing, you have street cop occupational culture wanting something different. Those two are going to clash, and that's going to make change difficult. Okay, because you have officers that often graduate from the academy with one set of behaviors, which would be managerial culture, right? Because the managers are the ones that run the academies. And then over time, those behaviors change to more of the occupational culture. of the police. So you can enact all the strategies you want, but regardless of what kind of change you do, there's going to be resistance. Okay, and resistance to change is the main reason why change efforts fail. So one of the main reasons why you have resistance that's hard to deal with is that people or police officers, okay, that are undergoing change often react emotionally to the change rather than rationally to change. And that makes it very difficult for police managers to overcome change resistance because it's very, very difficult to address emotional resistance rather than rational resistance. I'm sure you all have experienced something similar. Okay, you may not have been involved in a change effort, but if you've ever interacted with someone who is reacting emotionally to something, that's very, very difficult to deal with and hard to find common ground because there oftentimes isn't any common ground to find. Okay, and emotional resistance is always very specific to one person. So if you have many people that are reacting emotionally to something, it's very difficult to be able to address that resistance because it is so person specific, and there may not be anything tangible that can actually be done to counter that resistance. Okay? Inertia is another thing that makes change difficult. So inertia, just like in physics, is that once something is moving, it makes it more difficult to stop than if it had never moved at all. Okay, so inertia means that once something is being done a particular way, it's hard to change that. Or like the old saying, that this is how we've always done it, right? So that's hard to change once that has become ingrained with what police officers are doing. Because they spend a lot of time figuring out how they think they're going to do their job the most efficient way possible and don't want to try to refigure all that out again. So they resist changing anything. Misunderstandings are also part of resistance to change efforts. Okay, so with misunderstandings, the biggest thing is communication. So managers and administrators have to make sure that all aspects of the change, outcomes, consequences, all those things are very clear to the people involved in the change effort. Okay, group norms are also going to be a big deal, but that goes back to kind of the culture. Okay, those are important, and they'll be resistant to change because, again, you have these norms that are developed. Change changes those norms. You have to develop new norms. Difficult to change. There's a reason why they're called group norms, right? So one of the best ways to kind of get rid of or counter some of this resistance is to engage officers in the change process. Okay, if officers feel like they're involved, oftentimes you'll have less resistance, even if they don't like the change, because they feel like they've been involved in the process. And really kind of the last kind of main type of resistance is balance of power issues that lead to resistance to change. Okay, so any change that people believe may threaten their autonomy, may threaten authority, may threaten their power or their status, any of those things will be met with resistance. But really the key to overcoming most resistance is communication. Being clear, being transparent, involving people in the process. So communication as a manager is really key. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about subculture already, but really culture and climate is really an important part when you're talking about trying to enact an organizational change or having an organization that can change. Okay, because change is hard and things change quickly in today's world. So organizations have to be much more nimble than they used to be. And you do that by establishing a culture or climate of change. Okay, if the culture of the organization is one that already accepts change or at least is willing to consider change, that makes change much easier. Okay, and those types of climates also foster innovation, right? And those things and innovation helps to enact change. Okay, because if you're fostering innovation, you have this attitude that continuous improvement is important because innovation should be improvement. And if you're fostering innovation, you're fostering improvement, that becomes your culture or your climate. So if everybody always believes that you should be looking for new and better ways to do the work, then that is what happens. Okay? But again, when you're talking about these things, we've hit on this multiple times already. Make sure you measure what matters. Okay? You cannot be participating in continuous improvement if you're not measuring the things that matter to inform where your improvement needs to be made. Okay, you may be improving on things that don't need improving, when you have other things that do need improving that you're not messing with because you're not actually measuring what you need to be measuring. Okay, and one way to do this is to engage in research. Now, this could be research within the organization. You could have your own research and development division. You could also pair with outside academics to conduct research for you, but use those results to implement changes and become more of a learning organization where organizations process what they've learned through research and then effectively implement it. All right, I'm going to stop here for this week. If you have reached the end of this video, send me an email that says finished it, and I will give you 3 extra credit points on your assignment this week. So read the chapter, complete the quiz and the assignment, and let me know if you have questions. And again, if you've made it to this point, email me finished it, and I'll give you 3 extra credit points. I'll see you next week.